On November 6, 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected the 16th President of the United States. President-elect Lincoln evaded possible assassination in Baltimore, and on February 23, 1861, arrived in disguise in Washington, D.C. At his inauguration on March 4, 1861, sharpshooters watched the inaugural platform, while soldiers on horseback patrolled the surrounding area. In a final attempt to reunite the United States and prevent a certain war, Lincoln supported the petition of the Corwin Amendment, which had passed Congress the previous day. This amendment, which explicitly protected slavery in those states which it had already existed, was considered by Lincoln to be a possible way to stave off secession. A few short weeks before the war, he went so far as to pen a letter to every governor asking for their support in ratifying the Corwin Amendment. In his first inaugural address, Lincoln asked rhetorically that even if the Constitution were a simple contract, would it not require the agreement of all parties to rescind it?
In your hands, my dissatisfied fellow countrymen, and not in mine, is the momentous issue of civil war. The government will not assail you. You can have no conflict without being yourselves the aggressors. You have no oath registered in heaven to destroy the government, while I shall have the most solemn one to preserve, protect, and defend it. I am loath to close. We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained it, must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic cords of memory, stretching from every battlefield and patriotic grave to every living heart and hearthstone all over this broad land, will yet swell the chorus of the Union, when again touched, as surely they will be, by the better angels of our nature.
My dearest Sarah, I will not risk disappointing you again by not writing, even supposing you do come up, because I may again be disappointed in not seeing you. Hancock and Sheridan, with 25,000 men, started last evening to demonstrate towards Richmond. I do not think they will get in because they do not think they can, and that is fatal to any movement. If men think they can't succeed, they will not. I am interrupted by a call to go to the front, and so must close. Yours as ever, Benjamin F. Butler, July 28, 1864.
The life of a soldier in the 1860s was an arduous one, and for thousands of young Americans who left home to fight for their cause, it was an experience none of them would ever forget. Military service meant many months away from home and loved ones, long hours of drill, and often inadequate food and shelter, disease, and many days spent marching on hot, dusty roads, or in rainstorms, burdened with carrying everything a man needed to be a soldier, as well as baggage enough to make his life as comfortable as possible. There were long stretches of boredom in camp, interspersed with moments of sheer terror experienced on the battlefield. For these civilians turned soldiers, it was very difficult at first getting used to the rigors and demands of Army life.
Most of them would not be used to the regimentation of being in the military. And then the comforts of home, of a regularly cooked meal, a regular supply of meat in their diet. Their diet would change significantly. They were used to quite a bit of freedom, and it was a very democratic group of people for the most part. So, and all of a sudden the regimentation of having to take orders and give orders, and often it was their neighbor or someone that they knew was suddenly in a position of power over them, and this often upset them. And there were a lot of stories early in the war about soldiers kind of like, who are you to be giving me orders? I knew you as a pipsqueak, and all of a sudden you're in charge of me. And so it took a while to iron out those sort of disciplinary problems and issues.
Most had been farmers all their lives and were indifferent to the need to obey orders. Discipline, first and foremost, was a difficult concept to understand, especially in the beginning when one had to salute an officer, and that officer may have been a hometown postmaster only a few weeks before. Uniforms issued in both armies were not quite as fancy as those worn by hometown militias, and soldiering did not always mean fighting. There were fatigue duties such as assignments to gather wood for cook fires, metal fittings had to be polished, horses groomed and watered. Fields had to be cleared for parades and drill, and there were water details for the cookhouse. Guard duty meant long hours pacing up and down a well-trod line, day or night, rain or shine, always on watch for a foe who might be lurking anywhere in hostile countryside. A furlough was hard to come by, as every man was needed in the field, and few men had a chance to ever visit home. A soldier's home in camp was a rectangular piece of canvas, buttoned to another to form a small two-man tent, or dog tent, as soldiers called them. Every Union soldier was issued one for use during active campaign, and men joked that only a dog would crawl under it to stay dry from the rain. The tent could be easily pitched for the evening by tying each end to a rifle stuck into the ground by the bayonet, or by stringing it up on fence rails.
Many times the winters were damp, they were cold, they were not cold and crisp and snowy, but they were damp and wet and really unpleasant. So they would try to build some sort of permanent shelters, and routinely they did build permanent shelters. So you might see log-walled and maybe canvas-topped dwellings. There were often stoves in there, wood-burner stoves, little portable things. Early in the war, tents were more common, round tents called the Sibley tent that had in the center a stove, and the men slept spoon fashion in a circle around that stove, and so tightly packed that somebody would yell spoon, and everybody was supposed to turn over at the same time so they could all shift sides.
Confederates did not receive shelter tents, though some Confederate units were issued a variation of the tent, which they pitched as a lean-to or shelter. As the war progressed, it was very common for a Confederate camp to be filled with captured Union tents, as well as captured blankets, canteens, and haversacks. Confederates especially prized the Union rubber blankets, which were not manufactured in the South and were ideal as a ground cloth or overhead shelter. The drill was important for the infantry, for they used tactics that had changed little since the time of the American Revolution or the age of Napoleon.